Well, all right. Welcome back to Dan's Astrology. Today is March 22nd, 2026. The conjunction that we're facing right now is Saturn, Neptune, and the Sun in Aries. And I have to admit that this particular stretch that we're in right now is particularly heavy duty in terms of astrology because Saturn, being the greater malefic, the lead weight of alchemy, is obviously going to lend a certain kind of dimension of gravity to what's happening right now, right? And I have to also, it's a malefic, considered to be a bad planet in a simple way. And in my own chart, Aries is a bad house for me. And in the midst, I have to admit, I'm an amateur, if you haven't noticed. There are certain things, certain creative choices, perhaps that more professional, more experienced astrologers, may take to when they're applying these delineations or whatever, or how they're doing their channel. I do things a little bit differently. Um, and there's something about the idea of like old age with Saturn, the senex, the elder, versus the idea of an Aries being diminished, being in a place where, since Aries has to do with spring, the spring equinox, the represented symbolically by Aries, the ram or the lamb, with an emphasis on youth and youngness. There is a place where Saturn is at odds here. But to give you the good news is that we are in the middle of, or the beginning, I should say, of spring season, in where the sun has entered into Aries and has now conjoined Neptune and will conjoin Saturn in a few days. And in this Sun, Saturn, Neptune, and Aries conjunction, the Sun is exalted, okay? And so if you think about the polarity that exists between the Sun and Saturn, that the Sun exalts in Aries because it is a time when the light is rising, the light is gaining, and the energy that we feel in the spring season is one of things going up, right? But however, if you are on the southern hemisphere, it's interesting because there's this weird inversion where there are a lot of Australian astrologers. I'm thinking about this because this is actually an Australian hat, believe it or not. But there's something about the southern hemisphere versus the northern hemisphere, in that, admittedly, what I'm doing is tropical astrology, and that the meaning of the signs is very much anchored into the geocentrism of the north, right? But however, there's this kind of interesting thing where there's a polarity that exists in this kind of inverse dynamic that is, you can see it in the duality of like the full moon being like the reflection of the opposite sign, and that there's like sort of like the yin yang. Maybe I don't have to get into all this right now, but there is something about Aries, right? About how the light standing perhaps for the light of awareness, the light of intelligence, Sun having to do with things like the archetype of the hero or the leader or something like that, and the Saturn being the senex, the elder, the old person who, and with Neptune, something about this is that the positive thing going on right now is that there is a period of time where the old age is giving way to the new insight of youth, and a kind of a vital young new energy of spring coming through, basically, right? Now the problem about this, of course, is that when you apply it to the actual mundane situation that we're all in, it's clear that there's a certain degree, like, I mean, we live in a time dominated by ignorance and stupidity. And I have to admit that in the midst of this transit, I keep debating whether or not I should just like go on a hiatus, which I have to admit I have done before in the production of this channel. Just, announce going on like a kind of vacation, take a sabbatical or whatever, right? And just take a break because with this whole transit, there's a certain the I mean there's at least like I guess the benefit here is that there may be a chance for like the wisdom of awareness to give way over the ignorance and stupidity that's out there, but it's difficult to do if you are in a kind of a narcissistic monovision where you're not able to sort of admit to your own stupidity, right? And I have, like, in the process of doing it, I have to admit that sometimes it seems counterproductive to be using YouTube to produce astrology content like this, because afterwards, sometimes I feel kind of stupid, like I'm doing something kind of dumb by doing this. And I have to also admit that all of this comes from I've developed a certain strategy, and that perhaps my strategy is to go certain kind of like against the grain of the way that I see a lot of the online content going, in that I'm inspired by Jack Kerouac had this idea of first thought, best thought, and the idea of like a stream of consciousness, creative process, rather than trying to like carefully edit things together. And the problem about this is that with Saturn and Neptune together reminds me of like if you would see like signs on the highway, like a yield sign, or you know what? I'll give you a story. Once I went on a vacation somewhere. I won't say where right now. And when I was going for a stroll, I was like walking down the side of the road, kind of exploring, and I saw on the side of the road when people there's like a crime scene, and like somebody like the forensic person paints like the outline around the dead body and then like takes them away. There was like a legit, like it looked like it was out of a cartoon or something, like the outline of a dead body on the road. And I just saw that and I'm like, no, okay, I don't really feel like this is like you're kind of going in this direction where there's all these certain kind of like turn back warning signs, don't be stupid, you're an idiot or whatever. And yet there's some kind of like there's a certain YOLO attitude to youth, I find, right? Like when you're a young man, I think that there's a certain wisdom, believe it or not, in as millennials. That was a millennial thing, mind you. I'm part of the YOLO generation. You only live once, right? And like the whole YOLO thing is that there's all sorts of times when people like apparently in China there was an earthquake that only like one or two people died from it, and like one of these people, like a flower pot that was on somebody's balcony fell off, and this person just happened to be walking down the side of the road, and the flower pot falls on their head, right? That could be you don't know, right? So the thing is, like with a YOLO mentality, is that if you're just going to end up dying from a fucking flower pot falling on your head, then you've got a whole kind of allowance to do a whole bunch of stupid shit and get away with it, because you never know what, like you could at any minute something go wrong, right? And so there's you have an allowance for a kind of a YOLO adventure, right? But in this, we have this kind of clusterfuck situation now of the younginess of youth and versus the senile old age. And the thing about when you're young, you know how young people, there's a certain common archetype where the young 19-year-old thinks he knows everything, has it all figured out, and is going to lecture. You could be, what are you going to do? You're going to start a band and like lecture the world about how things should be otherwise, and then like you think it's kind of like the fool's gold situation, right? Saturn, This is another great one for this archetype, because Neptune has the people who have trained me often use the sort of Sun Neptune thing as fool's gold. You can see the Saturn and Sun as being the lead and the gold in alchemy. You've got this sort of thing where you think you've got some genuine insight. You think you know better, and you think that you have some sort of gift to give to the world, and yet you are actually just, and you don't. The point is that you don't know your own ignorance yet, right? And what is there's, I think, the actual process of transmutation, or whatever it would be to, instead of going for that initial thing, like you think you have something to contribute, is to slow the hell down and then realize your own stupidity, your own ignorance, right? Or that when you after, or if you do want to just go ahead and, like, deliver unto the world the gifts that you have, pay attention to how you feel afterwards, and sort of try to, like, sit with the feeling of having delivered your message, and to what degree do I feel like a total moron or like an idiot or something, and or do you feel like you've done something wrong that you shouldn't have? Or are you, how stupid are you anyways, right? And then you can sit with this sense of just being a moron. And this is where Sun Ra has this great line about, you have to let your ignorance guide you to freedom, right? Or let your ignorance set you free. This isn't the same thing as saying that ignorance is bliss, but rather that, to the extent that, like, another line that somebody had was that you cannot liberate someone who thinks he's already free, who doesn't see that he's in a cage, right? If you're trying to free the prisoners and they're convinced that the prison doesn't exist, you're not gonna get very far with them, right? And there's something about this. I'm going a bit abstract here, but I have to say that in trying to be an astrologer, there's something about the way that this could stand for, like, being blind, deaf, ignorant, stupid, senile, and stuff like this. I was kind of, and there's this thing, for me, the house that this is all happening in rules small animals, this, like, cats and dogs, or if you had, like, small livestock like chickens or something like that, right? And we've had a retrograde where it went back into Pisces, now it's going back into Aries. The first time it went to Aries, we had to put my dog down because she went blind, like, just like that, right? There's something about it where the problem about this is that if I can be very, like, oh, okay, this thing that has to do with, like, these kinds of problems into this kind of house with my animals, it's like I have a certain kind of not wanting to go there, but for the sake of trying to do astrology, I'm trying to just basically report that if you're using this as a divination thing of what to expect, and you've got a bunch of old animals around that are reaching old age, like, it does seem to work, astrology, right? And that the other thing is that there's the politics right now. Most other astrologers are smart enough, should say, to avoid. Well, actually, no, I shouldn't say that. There's a huge spectrum of people doing astrology out there. Some of them are bringing the politics into it. Some of them aren't. And I am basically uncomfortable. I feel like a moron, basically, by trying to I feel like there's things that I like that are just, like, don't seem to go together very well, right? They seem to, and there's something about what I'm trying to understand about the astrology is that Aries has a very, like, there's this cliche of the masculine and feminine kind of yin-yang stuff that underlies all this. And one of the things about this is that if you think about the archetype of mothers with children and stuff like this, is that the mother there's some kind of idea that the feminine is more to do with the multiplicity, in being more like looking after a bunch of animals or looking after a bunch of children or being involved in the community or something. And in contrast, the yang or the masculine is very like individuating or wants to be like the absent father syndrome or something like this. And this all goes back to Christianity and the idea that like God created the world, but now he's transcendent and far away. And there's a certain kind of like, the mundane world is full of a million different animals, but there's only one true transcendent truth, but that's, remote and off in heaven. And, there's this underlying metaphysical thing that is like to be the woman is Mother Earth, and there's all the animals and things like this, and then there's this the singular is also like transcendent and not involved or something like that, right? But there's something about this where it's like trying to like trying to keep all this sort of metaphysical philosophical stuff in mind and also face the reality of war and politics and all this kind of stuff. There's some kind of like, in the midst of all of this, there seems to also be a problem with Saturn and Neptune around scarcity and the monoculture, right? One of the things that I realized in doing my research around this is that if you look at examples of historic things that happened around Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, one of the most dramatic was the Irish potato famine, right? And part of what led to the potato famine was the fact that the potato took over as a monoculture, right? And if you want to understand why the potato took over as a monoculture, why the potato became so popular with the Irish, the potato was a product of colonialism, meaning that the potato came from Peru. But the thing is that the Irish were always a kind of like a peasant population that had to like pay a certain amount of their agricultural produce and taxes to the British, right? And so that you've got the elite class ruling the peasants by taxing them and all this kind of stuff. And in that situation, you can use potatoes to like, it's when you have wheat and stuff, it's very easy to see, but with potatoes, you could like plant potatoes underground and then put cover crops on top of them. So like, it would be like, oh, that's just a herb bush or something, right? Or you could like, those are some flowers over there, but there's actually potatoes hiding underneath. And so that like, and it's also potatoes are dead easy to grow, right? So there's something about potato, but like because they had those advantages, they became the monocrop. And then they were the monocrop in this foreign environment was vulnerable to the potato blight, right? And this is I don't know, I'm just kind of winging. My style is kind of loose, and I don't have the date memorized, right? But I'll put that in my notes or whatever, right? So these are kind of things about the scarcity goes with Saturn because it's like the miserly old person who doesn't want to spend too much money on things and like counts the coupons and is very stingy or something like that, right? Is like when you've got that as a god, as an archetype, and then with Neptune, it's kind of like there's this kind of like, oh, we'll just like potatoes are so easy to grow, guys. We'll just hang out, eat potatoes all day, hide them from the English. We'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Like this is kind of like there's this kind of like idealism with Neptune versus there's a kind of like the stingy, hard reality of like, oh, you thought you cheated the tax man by hiding all the potatoes, but now you've angered the old gods and they're cursed your potato crop, right? This is basically what the point is that it's a gloomy transit, but if you want to be optimistic about it, be a little bit more optimistic, we've got the sun here exalted, conjoining this, so that you've got a opportunity for some yangy, heroic young people to shed some insight on the situation, so that instead of living your life in a state of misery, ignorance, and darkness, you can have some insight in the situation, right? Now, of course, the problem about this is that this light and awareness without compassion is Luciferian, right? Need we remind you that Lucifer was the light bearer, right? And so the idea of an ascendant rising light is in itself could be ungodly, unholy, even, right? So we need to the most important thing I would say is to like to do everything you do with a love and compassion for all people, even your enemies, as the Christians would say, right? And I've somehow, this was looking pretty bad. But I found a way to feel positive about this transit, and to continue to deliver my audience some new content. And I feel like I'm kind of avoiding the politics about, or whatever. I can always do more videos later. This is how it's coming out today. I guess this is good enough for now. Thanks for watching. I hope you like my hat today. I'm just using this as I'm trying out different things. Thanks for watching.